Great. I think we're all set. Lincoln, I'll let you take us away.
Awesome. Thanks, Brooke. Hi, everyone. So my name is Lincoln. I am one of the graduate assistants here at the Career Management Center. If you haven't seen me at our previous two workshops, and so this is the third one in our series, trying to focus more on networking, career exploration, and specifically how to advance that through informational interviews. And can you hit next slide, please, Brooke?
Sure.
So yeah, some brief introductions. As I said, I'm the outgoing graduate assistant. I have been at Vanderbilt for 2 years in the School of Education, finishing up my master's, and I will be going to higher education administration afterwards. Jasmine.
Hi everyone, my name is Jasmine. I am a second year MED student in the international education policy and management program with the focus on higher education. I originally come from China, and before arriving at Vanderbilt, I've been working for 4 years from teaching to administration in the US, China, and Dubai. Currently, I am doing my internship at Career Management Service at Owen School, and also as a graduate assistant in the Dean's Office at Peabody College. And I'm also very interested in higher education administration. So welcome everyone.
Great. And I'm Brooke, everybody. I'm on staff with the Career Management Center and have been working. About a year ago, we started our office, started working with the Data Science Institute. So I'm glad to be able to continue that. Lincoln and I got that rolling this past year and excited to continue it and to have Jasmine on board as we get things going for this coming year. So yeah, look forward to our time today.
Okay, so we're just gonna jump right in. What is an informational interview? So it's an interview that allows you to like learn more about specifically like an industry that you're interested in working in, a company within that industry, or within certain companies, like a certain role or position. And unlike a job interview, right? In an informational interview, you are the one asking the questions of the other person. And you should try to keep it pretty short, around like 15 to 20 minutes, because you are taking up like work time for the person that you're interviewing. If you want to hit the next slide, please, Brooke.
Mm-hmm.
So the purpose of it, right, is exploration, career exploration. If you're changing industries or you're just trying to get started with a job search, how do you know what positions you are a good fit for, that you're qualified for, and that you would enjoy and find passion in? And so how you would do that is trying to access your network and connections through that, and then hopefully conducting informational interviews with people within your network. It's also very important to think about informational interviews because a lot of the job market is like hidden. So if you look at the job market iceberg, these are approximate percentages, but a lot of jobs don't get posted on sites like LinkedIn or Indeed. They're hidden, and you would have to like figure out, okay, I have to reach out to headhunting companies, or I have to reach out to people at companies, and then they would refer me internally. A lot of times, like you'll have positions that will get posted, right? That will be in the 25%, but they only have to get posted for like guideline or restrictions reasons for like HR, but they're being reserved for internal recommendations already. So even if you apply and you can see the posting, it's technically hidden. And then like lastly, it's also good practice for when you do real job interviews because it allows you to dress up, visit places of work that was more applicable like pre-COVID, but as things open up more, hopefully, we're all able to do more of these informational interviews in person. 'Cause I think there's a lot that you can gain from like walking the halls of a company and actually sitting down and talking with whoever you're interviewing. Next
And
slide, please, Brooke.
I think
Oh,
maybe
sorry.
I'll add to this. I think, I mean, you brought up some great points, and hopefully if anybody is wondering, why are we talking about informational interviewing? Hopefully this helps you to see the relevance both right now, when a lot of you may not be looking at this point possibly for an internship or for a job, but you're in the future that you may be. But also like that very first point, it's a great way to start having these conversations and start learning more about, what are the different roles out there that one can do with a degree in data science. And I think, that job market iceberg, I think it's a really important thing to be thinking about and to understand. I think some people look at that and are like, okay, what what do I do with this? What does this mean? And I mean, I'll say, like, for an example, at Vanderbilt, we have a number. If you go on the Vanderbilt job website, if any of you want to work at Vanderbilt at some point in the future, there are job postings on there, and a lot of them are public, but there are also a percentage of them that are internal. There's a different link that we can go to, employees can go to, and you can apply for certain jobs. So a lot of times when people are advancing within the organization, those postings are just internal. And you can learn about those opportunities if you're inside the company, or also you can learn about those opportunities a lot of times by talking with people in the company, even if you're not currently there. And I think that, 45% that comes through networking. I mean, I think a lot of times we'll have students that reach out to an organization and they may say, hey, we haven't had an internship, or we're thinking about having an intern, but we don't have it posted yet. And the great news is, if you can start talking with them at that point, then when they're thinking about, oh, yeah, that's right, we do need an intern for this summer. Like, you're the very first person talking to them. You're the first person that's going to come to mind. It's kind of your position to lose. You're not competing with a pool of other candidates through a job posting. So there's some real advantages to that. So, all right, we'll stop hijacking your slide, Lincoln.
Yes, so thank you for that, Brooke. Very important. So thinking about like who you want to be interviewing, right? Preferably it's somebody that you already have some knowledge or contact with. Doesn't have to be like a first degree connection, but hopefully you know them through like your family or friends right now, if you're just a student. But if you have some work experience, previous coworkers, your peers within the company that you're working at, or like, students at the DSI, faculty at the DSI, or, previous faculty from college, and also, reaching out to us at the CMC. Brooke and the other career coaches have like massive networks and can refer you to like people at a multitude of companies that you're interested in working for. And if you're interested in interviewing somebody that is not within your network, but you found them through like LinkedIn, you can reach out, cold. So like cold calling or cold contacting them through email to set up a separate time to have the informational interview. But preferably you'll have already reached out through like LinkedIn, which I will go into on the next slide. So yeah, ideally, right, you want to establish contact through other services like LinkedIn, or if you both went to like the same university, but you don't know them, like through your university's alumni association, or like the career site for your college, like Handshake. For Vanderbilt, it was Simplicity, but we called it Doorways. Now it's shifting over to Handshake. So when you are reaching out in your email or your phone call, right, there's certain tips that you want to keep in mind. You want to ask them for help, and thank them for taking time out of their day just to respond to you, even if you don't set up a time later, or they're taking time out of their workday to get back to you. If they do agree, be specific in what you're asking of them, right? Provide your own times that you're free to meet. If you're going to physically visit their company or their place of work, provide like a coffee shop nearby that you can meet with them. And when you do actually write the email or phone call, right, you want to emphasize how you know them, like your shared connections. If you went to school together, or if you both like worked at the same company before. And what I can't stress enough is you want to use the interview to learn, right? You don't want to make it seem like very transactional. Like, don't ask them for a job straight off the bat, right? And you don't want to make it seem like you're only doing this because you want an internship at their company later, right? This is purely about exploratory purposes. And if an interview or a job comes about later, that's great, but you don't want to be talking about that when you first reach out. And on the left, like you can see, this is from the 2-hour job search. It's a great resource. And the person who wrote the book about the 2-hour job search will actually be speaking at Vanderbilt later. But here is like his tips, right? With an example email, right? You want to keep it short, emphasize the connections, right? Don't ask for a job. Keep everything pretty concise and direct. Don't make it about you, right? Make it about reaching out, them, their time, and be specific about like why you're interested in interviewing them. So the company that they work at, their position, things that you can mention about them. Yeah, sorry. Bye, Steve. Dalton, he will be speaking, I think, in October at Vanderbilt. And his 2-hour job search is great. I use it myself when I was doing the job search.
It is it is a helpful tool. And if you're interested, there is the slides. This comes from the slides that he used when he presented this past fall with us. And you can find those slides in the resource library on 1220. I'm going to try to remember later to add the link.
I actually put that in the resources afterwards.
Oh, good. Perfect.
Yeah,
thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
Awesome. So so that's there, and it's another good place to look, along with some other sample resumes. There are sample networking emails that Lincoln will talk about more too.
If you want to hit next, Brooke.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, so now that you've decided like who you're going to be interviewing, right? How do you prepare for this? So you don't want to go into it, without any preparation, right? You want to come up with a list of questions. I think having an outline for the information that you're trying to glean from the interview is very important, right? Don't ask questions that you could find out by Googling or by looking on their LinkedIn, right? Things that like doesn't require them to be actually speaking to you. You don't want to waste your time asking. And if you're also coming into the industry pretty new, or you're switching industries and you're not super well versed in the field, right? Do some research beforehand, get to know like the vocabulary used, like the lingo for the field or any technical jargon. Think about like big players within the industries and how like the company that they're working at matches up against them, pros and cons. And if you feel kind of nervous asking these questions during the informational interview, get some practice in, right? Ask somebody that you're comfortable talking to for 15, 20 minutes to do a mock informational interview with you, so you can run through your questions, do some trimming for things that may not be super helpful during the actual interview.
I think that's a great idea of practicing with someone you're comfortable with, because I think the very first time when I think about when I started doing this, I was definitely more intimidated by it. It's not, I don't think it's a lot of people's innate thought of like, oh, I'm going to go find somebody I don't know at all and reach out and have a conversation with them. But I think, starting out with people that someone who's, it could be, someone that you just recently graduated with. It could be who's working in a company you're really interested in. It could be, a family member, an aunt or uncle who works with in a role. You're like, oh, I've always wanted to ask them more about this. This can be a great time to play that student card and be, hey, I'm starting this new program, this data science program. I want to learn a little bit more what it's like working in a technology company or working in this kind of a job. So it's a great way to sort of practice and get yourself ready to then have conversations with people you don't know as well. All right.
Yeah, I'm not going to go through every question here, but these are some good example interview questions. I'm going to try to pick out ones that I asked in my informational interviews. So like for industry specifically, like I like asking, what is the most rewarding thing and what is the most challenging? And you can even narrow this down to like about the company or about the position as well. Kind of a related question is like, what do you wish you knew before you started your job? I think that tells you a lot about like what's unexpected within the position or within the field, and how can you prepare for that kind of unexpected nature. Another question that I found very helpful was within industry, like my background is in, for me, it's in school counseling, but I was trying to go into higher education. How do you think I can best leverage my experience, in school counseling to get into higher education? I think that was very important for me to figure out like, oh, I'm not as restricted by my degree as I think. There's these commonalities between like what I know and can do and what's required of me within this industry that I'm exploring and interested in working in. Other important, well, I mean, they're important, but like questions that I asked myself, like how did you come to choose this company over others in this field? So when I was asking, contacts at Vanderbilt, I asked them like, oh, like why did you choose Vanderbilt over like the previous institution that you were working at, or choosing to go back to where you went to college, if that was an option. You want to figure out like what about the company is important outside of like tangibles that you can see from the outside, right? Like, oh, it's great. It has like this prestige or it pays me this much, things that you can just find out through like LinkedIn. But what can you not see from the internal workings that not only like cause them to choose that company, but stay there after they started working there? Other questions?
Something else I'll add on this too is when you think about having an informational interview, I'd really encourage you. I think Lincoln's going to get into this a little bit next, but to have something that you can write down both your questions, but also take notes on the responses. It'd be great to have something that you can take with you to an in-person informational interview. Also, even if you're doing it through Zoom, personally, I think it's not always the best way to be like typing away while you're talking to somebody. So just having something you can like take some notes on, because a lot of these things will help you as you're, applying to some of these companies. One of the main things you need to address in a cover letter when you're applying to a company is, why is it that you're interested in that organization? Saying like, oh, I talked with someone from this organization. Here's what they said. And here are some of the great parts that I learned about the organization through that conversation. Like that can make a really strong cover letter.
Yeah, I definitely use like a notebook when I was doing mine. Like even when I was meeting with them over Zoom, I think it's not as like loud as typing. And I think for me, and it's been proven through studies, right? Like that you retain the information better when you write it down instead of typing. Yeah, I think one final question that I want to highlight is within the personal one, like based on what you know about my background, right? What do you see as my weaknesses, and how would I, address those concerns that a potential hiring manager has? So this is something that you're going to ask like when you're thinking about internships or jobs, like how to boost up some potential, weak points within your resume and experiences. And, if they have suggestions, that's great. But yeah, next slide, please, Brooke.
Mhm.
So yeah, here's some tips and tricks. when you're just starting out the informational interview, right, you want to let them know like who you are, why you're interested, why you're reaching out, right? But you want to keep it pretty short, right? This is where your elevator pitch goes. If you're not super knowledgeable about what that is, it's like kind of thrown around a lot in like the business school community, and it's very short, you know, couple key points about like who you are, your background, um, what you want to be doing after like, you know, your current schooling, and like why. And, you know, keep it pretty short, um, especially because within an informational interview, like 15 to 20 minutes, and the other person is taking time out of their day to talk to you. So, you know, keep it pretty brief. You also want to re-emphasize like why you selected this person, right? How you're connected to them. Um, when you're talking to them, right, you kind of want to prime them to think about other people that they can refer you to so that you can do informational interviews with those people, or, you know, think about like positions at those companies as well. If you're thinking about like internships or full-time positions, you don't want to ask at the end of the interview, like, oh, hey, like, you know, do you have people in mind? You want to mention it at the start, give them time to think about it during the interview, and then you can follow up again by asking, you know, who do you think I can reach out to? Do you have any recommendations internally within your company, or do you have any like external connections that I can follow up with? Obviously, you know, there's time constraints. If it's possible for you to go past, you know, whatever 20 minutes that you allotted, great. But if not, you know, be prepared to end it on time, you know, respect the other person's time. And, you know, if you have any additional questions, you can try to follow up with them like later through an email after you thank them. I also think it's really important to not shy away from certain, you know, sensitive topics like salary, but you have to be very careful how you're asking it, right? Don't approach the other person and ask them like, oh, like how much do you make, right? Do some research beforehand, look up the industry, the company, the position, you know, like Glassdoor, other sites like that have, you know, ranges of salaries, and then, you know, ask them to confirm the research that you've done. Like, this is what I've seen online, you know, is this true for where you work, right? Like wherever in the US you're located, you know, does this seem accurate? And then like finally, right, be pretty adaptable when you're doing the interview. You don't need to ask every question that you came up with. When I was doing mine, I had like 10 questions, and I like didn't have enough time to ask, you know, 10 questions. So be willing to adapt on the fly, right? If they have an answer that prompts you to think about, oh, like this question, you know, would be very helpful, ask that question, even if you didn't write it down beforehand, right? Things can kind of change as you go. And what's important is that the conversation feels natural and flows well. Anything to add, Brooke?
No, I think we covered that point well.
Okay. And then, yeah, so finally thinking about like, what do you do after the informational interview? Very, very important, right? Write them a thank you email, right? Like as soon as possible, the day of or day after, and thank them for their time, and try to be specific. I think this is like pretty important for like any thank you letter, but, you know, especially for um, an informational interview, like what specifically they said, they answer your questions, what helped you, and then what concrete steps like you're going to be taking because of the interview, right? Like if they referred you to this other person, like how are you reaching out to them? What are you trying to set up with that person? This is not always possible, but, you know, you can also try to write a handwritten note on top of the thank you email. I think it really says a lot about how much the other person's time and efforts mean to you, right? And if you don't like know the location, if you're doing it over Zoom, that's fine. But if like this is somebody like at Vanderbilt that you did the informational interview with, like, I highly recommend also writing them a handwritten note. Gonna reemphasize, like, don't immediately ask for a job or an internship or a referral for a position, right? If you apply for a position later at that company, great, follow up with them, ask them for advice on things emphasized in your cover letter or your resume or like even your LinkedIn. But that comes later, right? Don't ask for something from them right after you've done the interview. And also, right, cultivate your new connection, right? I think networking should be thought of as like a two-way street. And it can be pretty hard to think about that for like students who are a lot younger, or have a lot less work experience than the people that you're interviewing. But there's things that you can do no matter how much experience or how old you are, right? Like if you see stuff that you think would be applicable or helpful for their company or their industry, send it to them. They don't have to read it, but the gesture shows. If you're going to like conferences to present, invite them to those. Once again, they don't have to accept, but I think like them knowing that you're thinking of them, that you're thinking about your new connection, is very important. If they did provide any advice to you or people to reach out to, right? Like you prime them to think about referrals to do more informational interviews with, follow up with them. How did those other informational interviews go? Or any shifts in your job search because of the advice that they provided. And on the right, I have kind of an example from one of the resources in the resource library of a thank you email, right? You will note that it says like, oh, I've attached a PDF with some ideas. I have your company's strategy. That's kind of like the two-way street, right? You may not be able to like do something that in depth, but you do want to be able to kind of like push and pull the relationship so that it's not just you kind of taking and taking and taking from your new connection.
Another example that comes to mind is I can think of a couple of times where we've had students who've reached out to someone, done an informational interview. It may be in the conversation it's come up that either they have somebody, in their family who is interested in coming to Vanderbilt or doing the data science program or wants, could be their child, could be a cousin or something like that. And so sometimes I know with informational interviews, it's turned out that, during the conversation that may come up. And sometimes the person asking for the informational interview has been able to help whoever that is in that other, the person they're reaching out to, their family. And they may, come to Vanderbilt and visit that person, and that person may take them to classes and introduce them to professors or something. So that's just one other way that you may be able to sort of return the favor and build the connection. And I'll say one other thing on this too is I think in my mind, there's sort of two broad categories of informational interviews. I would say there's sort of and this gets back to one of the earlier slides Lincoln had, there's sort of like informational interview when you're just trying to explore and learn what's out there. And then there's more informational interviewing where you're trying to learn what's out there, but you're really, really looking for an internship or a job, and that's a central point. And I would imagine that for a lot of you, you're probably at the standpoint of, thinking more longer term. And so this can be a great time to do more of those exploratory informational interviews, where you don't even have to, you're just learning. Like everything that you ask is just great information. It may help you think, oh, later on, I may need to follow up with this person, once I know more about their company, or once I know more about, the role that they're in, or the roles that they have for, data scientists. So doing a good job early on, I think, can be helpful and less pressure, and it can also, help get you ready once you're rounding back with some of those same people, and you're really looking for an internship or a job.
Yeah. Okay, and then so these are the resources that I mentioned before. I think everyone should have access to 1220, right? Like we're past the deposit dates. So within the resource library in 1220, like, that left-hand side of tabs, you can go into informational interviewing. So there's going to be like 3, articles there. Advice, how to get the most out of an informational interview, and an ultimate guide. And that's where I drew a lot of the information for this PowerPoint from. And then, as Brooke mentioned before, there's also going to be program-specific resources. So within the data science one, there's the 2-hour job search from last year, the slides for that, and then also some sample networking emails that you can, kind of use as a template to reach out. But yes, any questions about informational interviewing? We'll also be doing a broader Q&A at the end of today's workshop, but if there's any, burning questions right now, feel free to unmute and ask or type it in the chat.
Well, you all are thinking about what questions you may have or want to ask about this. Two things that I'll mention. One, if you're interested in learning more about networking, there is another session coming up. This session is really focused just on the incoming data science students. The session that is coming up, it's and Will, who's with us, knows the date better than I do. I think, is it the 29th? Is that correct, Will? June 29th. Okay. June 29th at 7 p.m. Central Time. Will and Jenny, one of our other coaches, they're doing a session that's on networking. It's going to be much more focused on some of the networking that our Masters of Finance students do. I will say that for different types of roles, different amounts of networking are required, and most of the Masters of Finance students are pursuing roles in investment banking and consulting. Those roles, you really need to do a lot of networking. This is an informational interviewing. This is sort of like what we're talking about. I would call like almost a much lighter version of what they're doing. So if you really want to like dig in to people who take this stuff very seriously and need to in order to get the very competitive jobs that they're pursuing, I'd encourage you to, you can, if this is level 1, that's level 2 or 3, join that session and you'll get some more perspective on it. But anyways, yes, any other questions that come up that relate to informational interviewing or networking that you are wondering about? And if not, I'd be curious too. I know when we have done some other sessions, we like, hey, when you talk about informational interviewing or networking, what's your gut reaction to that? I'd be curious too if we've been able to sway anybody's thoughts on this, because I know some people, when they hear the word networking, are like, oh, it sounds like sales. It does not sound like fun. It sounds, scary. It doesn't sound like something that fits with my personality. Hopefully we've been able to talk about it in a way that's makes a little bit more sense and is a little bit more helpful. But if anybody has any input on that, we welcome that too.
Yeah, I think for me, right, if nobody has any questions, it's when I was first thinking about networking, like, yeah, it sounded like something that only, MBA students, business students needed to do. But at the end of the day, it's like all about like the connection between you and somebody else, and like everyone is capable of doing that, and everyone, has some element of interpersonal contact within their positions. So it's not something that's like just restricted to certain industries. It's useful for like every single field. And I'm glad that I was able to like learn more about it, kind of go through the process, and then share some things that I came across within my own informational interviews. But if nobody has any questions, or if you're still thinking of them, we will have a separate Q&A time at the very end of this workshop. I will pass it along to Brooke and Jasmine then.
All right. I've got a couple more things I want to touch on in networking, and just kind of the overall scope of what our office provides. And then we're going to switch in the next couple of minutes. We're going to switch to some content that's really targeted for are international students, students on an F1 or J1 visa, or will be coming in on F1 or J1 visa. But before we get into that, this is something that we often talk about with our students. So you'll see this again at some point, but this is sort of like a process or a way that we like to think about doing the job search. Starting out thinking about some of the different career path options, what you can do with the degree, thinking about your story and plan. Lincoln was talking a little bit about how a lot of times in informational interview, you'll end up giving your elevator pitch or telling the story of, oh, this is why I'm pursuing I'm attending the data science program at Vanderbilt, and this is why I want to work in a role in artificial intelligence or machine learning or data engineering or data science. So having that story down. Lincoln just very thoroughly covered informational interviews. And I think you'll see that informational interviews are helpful, I think, early on as you're exploring different paths, as you're hearing other people's stories, but it also helps with a lot of the other steps. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Building a resume is really important. If you didn't see it already, that last session that we did in May covered a lot about building your resume. Really encourage you all to be working on that, and I'll share a few more resources about that next. And then this is sort of the full list of, and I will say it's probably a little overly simplistic, this kind of pyramid, this ladder of how these skills kind of build one on another, different things that you'll be doing in your job search. Doesn't always happen in this order. But I will say, if you think about informational interviews as they talked about today, I mean, if you're doing that, it's going to help you craft your own story because you're hearing other people's stories, you're hearing what they experience. It's going to help you know about different career paths because hopefully you're talking with people that are in different options, different industries, different companies and sectors that you may be considering. It's definitely going to help you build an employer list because it's giving you a chance to know more about different companies and seeing, oh, would I want to work at this place or not? It's going to help you in writing cover letters, as we talk about, especially writing cover letters to people who work in the industries and companies you're speaking with. It'll help you identify skill gaps. It'll help you to think through, Lincoln had several great questions that related to that. Like, what are the things that I currently do well? What are the things that I'm going to need to do well to get jobs in these areas? Informational interviewing is a great way to prepare for job interviews. I can think of few better ways to get ready than talk with people who are working in the companies and in the roles you're interested in, because you can ask them questions. Basically, when you do a job interview, it's the same thing reversed, right? They're asking you questions to decide if they want to hire you. So informational interviews is something that will help you, and it's also something that you're thinking about succeeding and growing. Hopefully you'll be doing informational interviews throughout your career, because even after you have a job, you're going to be faced with challenges that you don't know how to. Someone will say, oh, do you know how to create this model? And you thought, I've never done that before. And one of the best ways to learn that is to talk to other people who do know how to do that and hear from their experiences. So that's a quick look at the job search process. Here's a quick look at some of the events that we have coming up. So yes, we already covered a couple of these different things, but we have more things coming up. On July 11th, we have another session where we're going to talk a little bit about timelines. We're going to talk a little bit about the Grace Hopper Conference. We're going to talk about some of the different career paths that students and industries that students go into. So that's coming up our next session. And then also coming up, we are going to have a resume book. We talked about this a little bit before, but basically a resume book is a way that employers can start to see your resumes, and a way for you to indicate to employers that you are indeed looking for summer internship. So I know it's very early, but we're going to talk about this a little bit more on the 11th, but we'd encourage those of you who can to please start working on these things, start working through that pyramid that we were just looking at in the last slide. Some of you may be saying, wait, why are we talking about this now? Like, haven't even started the program. I'll give you a quick preview of some of what we're going to talk about in the next time we meet on the 11th. But basically, some of the students who've landed the most competitive positions, the positions that I think people most want, they've started to work on these things now, like very, very early on. And to land roles with some of the best companies, most competitive companies, you need that competitive advantage of being ready to start now. And I think that's a huge advantage that this program has with being a 2-year program, is that you will have more chance to start getting in on some of the very best internships out there. But basically the earlier you're getting yourself ready, especially things like your resume, the more competitive chance that you have. So yeah, so these are finding the resource library, some of the different tools that Lincoln mentioned, sample resumes that are there. And then those of you who haven't done this already, I'd encourage you to put your resume in the Owen Vanderbilt format, just like you saw here, which you can use the tools in the resource library to do that. Jasmine's actually been working on some additional samples, so we're gonna have some further samples that we'll add soon for resumes. And then encourage you to set up a time to meet with Lincoln and go through your resume. He'll kind of walk you through that, give you some input and feedback, make sure its formatting's consistent, and really help it get ready for that resume book that is coming up. And you can set all of that up through 1220. That's the resource that we're looking at for all of this.
Yeah.
All right.
Sorry,
Yeah.
just to jump in, Brooke. If you have any questions on how to set up an appointment with me to go over your resume, please ask in the chat or message me on Slack or shoot me an email. I think the easiest way would be through Slack, but other formats as well, and I can walk you through how to set up an appointment with me. At the times I have don't work, like 9 to 2 p.m. CST, we can set up alternative times. That's just kind of when I work each day. So.
All right. Well, with that said, I'm going to take a pause, and if, like I said, we're going to continue on with some other information, but it is more related to international students and doing their own job search and some of the unique challenges they face. So I'm going to hit a pause on a recording, and